Today we welcome Steph Lorenzo, CEO and founder of Project Futures, to the Inspired Kindness Project. Project Futures has been around for a number of years now, and its main aim is to end human trafficking. This is not something I was overly familiar with. For example, I wasn't aware that just under 46 million people around the world are in slavery. I certainly wasn't aware that in the year ahead, 2 million children will be sold. And what was mostly shocking to me was that this is happening in our own backyard. The other way Australians are contributing to the trafficking trade in ways that they don't know about is through the products that they purchase. So here to tell us about what Project Futures are doing to end trafficking, hopefully in our lifetime, is Steph. Welcome, Steph.
Hello.
Steph, let's start by hearing a little bit about you and how you became passionate about this cause.
I never thought that I would work in charity as a young person. I did a Bachelor of International Communication at Macquarie University and thought that I would climb the ranks in the advertising and PR world to maybe be the CEO of an advertising agency by the time I turned 30. But when I was 21, I actually read a book about a woman who was sold into prostitution at a really young age in Cambodia. Her name's Somali Mam, and her life story just really, I guess, shocked me. It made me angry. It made me really inspired at the work she was doing in Cambodia. But it kind of opened my eyes up to this issue of sex trafficking, particularly, that was happening to young girls who were being subject to ridiculous abuses and heinous sort of crimes. And I thought, as a 21-year-old, you kind of know it all. You're not unaware about these issues, but something about her story just really shocked me. And she herself was sold into prostitution at a very young age in Cambodia. And so I decided, well, what can I do as a 21-year-old who lives a privileged life in Australia, who has family and friends that, continuously want to support things that you do. I thought, well, how can I use my marketing and comm skills to do something to make a difference? And so the one project or event I decided to organise was a bike ride through Cambodia. Just a one-off gig, nothing, didn't want to start a charity, didn't think about starting anything, just wanted to do an event to raise money for this woman who at the time had 3 safe houses in Cambodia that rescued, rehabilitated, reintegrated and educated women and children who had been forced into the sex trade. And that one bike ride that I had organised took a year, and we ended up getting 21 people involved. We raised $80,000. This was back in 2009. And we went on this amazing journey cycling through Cambodia with different people from around Australia. And it was just amazing. We met Somali Mam. We got to visit and spend International Women's Day at one of the centres with the girls there, understand the story, understand the struggle, understand how this actually happens in a country like Cambodia and around the world. And you can't come back, I guess you just can't come back from that experience and go, okay, back to my normal life, back to marketing and comms, back to, this quite superficial life we live in Australia. And the lucky life. It's so lucky, and I'm privileged to be able to say that. But there and then, and 3 months later from coming back from that experience, in June 2009, we registered Project Futures as a not-for-profit Australian organisation.
Tell me about the model for Project Futures and what you actually do.
We don't run any services for victims and survivors of human trafficking. We have 3 strategic goals in the way we actually pick our impact partners. So we focus on the 3 ways that we believe as Project Futures can lead to ending human trafficking is prevention, support services and empowerment. Where we started was support services, victims that are in need right now. Somali had safe houses, she had programs of care, rehabilitation, vocational training and so forth, confidence building for victims right now. And that kind of sat in our second goal around support services. But as we sort of grew in our knowledge of the issue, and particularly in 2011 when we were invited to speak to the Australian Federal Police and the Salvation Army and the Australian Red Cross and Anti-Slavery Australia, really great organisations here in Australia that were working on the issue of human trafficking here in Australia, I guess our mind got expanded a little bit. We were always just so focused on Somali Mam and the work she did there because again, we weren't working, there was no one working full-time at Project Futures. We were all working full-time in our own careers and doing it as a side gig just for fun. As we got bigger, as we were on Sunrise and all of these places, we started to get reached out to by many experts in the field here in Australia. And we, like I'm sure many people when they hear this, were shocked to find out that this is also an issue that happens in our own backyard in Australia. So in 2011, we decided to take on 2 other project partners based in Australia, the Salvation Army, who have the only trafficking and slavery safe house for women in Australia. It's the first of its kind, and it started in 2008. And Childwise, who work in the preventative space around research and development, understanding child exploitation and abuse and how we can curb it. So I guess we chose the Salvos first and foremost because it was the most similar. It was supporting victims and survivors as they needed now. Childwise was sort of a secondary choice due to needing to understand and learn about how we could actually stop it from happening in the first place. How can we prevent it? How can we support those that potentially are at the higher risk before they drop into it? And so Childwise was one of the beneficiaries we took on in, again, 2011 alongside Salvos. And as we grew, I guess we hope as we grow to take on more project partners, because also in the not-for-profit world, there needs to be more collaboration, I believe. I certainly didn't want to start anything new. I mean, my whole point was just to raise money for an organisation that was already existing overseas. With our laws here, and I understand why, you need to have legislation and you need to have the right processes for people to be able to do that, and for people to trust you with donations, and you need to have the transparency, accountability, all of those things. So I understand why you can't just raise money in your bank account and send it over to these organisations that you want to overseas. But I think our job as Project Futures is to be a awareness raiser, a fundraiser, and a support network for these projects that unfortunately don't get the needed credit that they deserve in the media. They find it very hard because they don't have people with marketing or comms skills to get their message across. Working together in that way, we play that role, and they play their role of actually having these programs in place on the ground in places like Cambodia and Australia. I think is the best way that we can actually work together to end human trafficking.
What are some of the biggest challenges that you've had to face so far?
It was much easier, I believe, 7.5 years ago than it is today. I think that it's both a positive and negative that there are so many startups and charities starting up. I think it's such a great thing because there are so many causes that need support. But I think then with that comes a lot of silos and a lot of competition as opposed to collaboration. And I think that as we move into this new era of, faster information, digital disruption, all of these areas, the new shiny thing is always the most exciting, whereas the organisation with the track record, it's definitely hard. And our biggest challenge at the moment is how we can scale and grow beyond just my network of how we began, how we get the best people on for not a lot of investment, because obviously in any business sense you could get, I know it's still very hard to get, VC funding or investment in terms of it's a great idea, it's got a great return. Our return is supporting the most vulnerable people. And so there's this sort of social capital chasm, I read this somewhere, where social enterprises and certainly not-for-profits, it's very hard for them to get any social capital. It's not impossible, but it's very hard for them to get social capital when the return is actually, I've just supported a woman and her family and got them out of this vulnerable situation. There's no monetary return, there's an emotional return, but not everyone, certainly not all investors obviously, don't see that. And unless you know a lot of high net worth philanthropists, or unless you're willing to network as much as you can, it's very tough because charity is emotional. How people connect to causes is very emotional, and it's very hard to connect to a cause that you potentially have no real connection with. Sure, I don't know where this is made, just say. but that doesn't affect me emotionally. Whereas if I had a friend or family member with a disease that was incurable or was very tough, it's easier to connect and support that issue. So I think that's a big challenge for our issue in general. A lot of people wouldn't know someone that's trafficked or wouldn't know them personally. And hearing stories on the TV and the media doesn't necessarily get the reaction that you might have gotten 7.5 years ago when less and less of these stories were aired. So I think the challenge is how to scale and grow, how to scale and grow beyond my network and my push for this, but also working together in the NGO community to understand the challenges that do face many organisations, and a lot of that is funding.
Tell me about the impact that Project Futures has actually had so far.
I think we've had a really amazing impact, particularly for our 5 project partners that we've supported over the years. From an estimate in round numbers, we've supported over 500 victims and survivors of human trafficking. We've engaged thousands of people here in Australia on the issue of human trafficking and slavery. I think as well, not just from a monetary perspective, but from a support perspective, we work with our project partners really closely. We're not just a granting body to them. We really do work with them on ideas, support for certain services or programs that are in need. And a great example of that is the Freedom Advocates project that we piloted with the Salvation Army in 2011. Through that project, we've trained and supported 5 freedom advocates, and these are survivors that, through their lived experience of human trafficking and slavery in Australia, we are training them to be able to speak out about their story, should they wish to, but also to affect change at a government level. And this was a direct, I guess the 2013 slavery bill that I mentioned was a direct reflection of the, really hard work and the constant training that a lot of these freedom advocates had to be able to meet with then Prime Minister Julia Gillard and also the opposition leader Tony Abbott at the time, the Attorney General, to share actually what they'd been through and to share the issues that had happened from a government level that at first showed them as criminals themselves. And so they have been able to effect huge change just from that one pilot project and build their confidence at the same time as well. So I think our effect has been huge, and we do hope that we can take on more projects as we grow as well.